What's going on, everybody? Greg Ehrenberg here from Stokastic.com. It's Friday, at least at the time that I'm recording. We just got through the UFC weigh-ins with everybody making weight. No fights canceled, and pretty excited about that because we only have 11 fights, so it would have definitely been a bummer if one of those fights fell off, and it's good. Don't have to change any of my analysis on anything. Don't have to go out and buy any more Rainmakers cards, everybody. Everything is intact. About to break it all down for you. So as you come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored here by DraftKings Rainmakers. So if you guys haven't checked out Rainmakers yet, there's a totally free starters pack that you can get access to by clicking on the link below. It's going to give you golfers to build out a golf lineup and a stud golfer of your choosing, like John Rahm, like Scotty Scheffler. We're here to talk about some MMA. I've already got some stats up on the screen from UFCstats.com where I do a lot of my research and gather my data. And I feel good about this card. I have some strong leans, and then also it's one that I've been preparing for a pretty good amount of time as far as Rainmakers is concerned. There's a lot of fighters that I've been stocking up on cards for this event for quite some time. So let's start to break it down. We're going to be talking about it from a DraftKings perspective, also from a Rainmakers perspective, and then I have some bets for this card as well that I'm going to give out to you guys. But I want to start by talking about the main event, Amanda Nunes taking on Aldana, and I guess to an extent, I understand where people are on the Aldana side just because 2 fights ago, we saw Amanda Nunes basically not really show up prepared against Juliana Pena at all. We saw Nunes end up looking decent in the first round and then just totally gassed out in the second round. Ended up on the mat and just basically quit and tapped in the fight. But then the rematch, we saw Amanda Nunes show up looking like herself, absolutely steamrolled Juliana Pena in the rematch. So this was supposed to be the third fight between Nunes and Pena, where, I mean, Nunes, I think, should have been like a minus 1,200 favorite or something like that in this fight. But Pena falls out due to a rib injury. Aldana steps in on short notice. Some people are on Aldana, I think, just because of what we saw out of Nunes a couple of fights ago and the fact that people think that maybe Oliver Hart isn't totally into fighting anymore. But I think something a lot of people might not really realize, these fighters are almost the exact same age. Like, we've got Nunes born May 30th, 1988, and then you've got Aldana born March 1988. So the age gap here is really non-existent, and I think a lot of people might think of Aldana as the younger fighter. Something else as well, there are such significant advantages for Nunes basically everywhere in this fight. Like, there's not a single place this fight could take place that I would not favor Amanda Nunes. On the feet, yeah, Aldana has power, so there's certainly some risk to Nunes when it's playing out on the feet, but there's a really easy path to victory for Amanda Nunes, and that is just taking Aldana to the ground. So Aldana's takedown defense on paper doesn't look bad at 81%, but a lot of that's just because she's not fought the strongest wrestlers and grapplers, and in some of her recent fights, she has been dominated on the ground against fighters who don't have nearly the wrestling and grappling that Amanda Nunes does. We saw Aldana taken down and controlled 5 times by Holly Holm. Her last fight against Macy Chiasson, I know that she ended up winning in the 3rd round by like a really weird liver kick from the ground, but that was a fight that Chiasson was winning pretty comfortably in control positions. She landed 3 out of 8 takedowns and had 3.5 minutes of control time. If Macy Chiasson is able to do that to Aldana, what is Nunes going to be able to do? So that's where I think the path to least resistance is for Nunes, who typically comes into fights with pretty good game plans. I'm hoping she looks to wrestle here, which is why, number one, I think she scores really well on DraftKings in a win. And we've seen Nunes go to her wrestling when she has to. That is not something she has any issue going to. If you look at the fight against Germaine de Randamie, for instance, here it is. So Nunes was having some issues on the feet with de Randamie's length and her power. So Nunes just said, screw this. I'm not messing around on the feet with her anymore. We're going to the ground. Lands 8 of 11 takedowns in that fight. Holds 18.5 minutes of control time. So if we take that one fight against Juliana Pena out of the picture, Nunes has shown that she could fight a hard 5 rounds multiple times over the course of her career. In fact, she even did it in the last fight against Juliana Pena. So I do think we have upside for big takedown numbers for Amanda Nunes, and also just the advantages she holds on the ground. I think she's live for a sub here. I did bet Amanda Nunes plus 500 to win by submission. She's one of my favorite plays on DraftKings. I'm going to be prioritizing her very heavily in Rainmakers as well. Not really going to be playing too much of Aldana. I mean, I guess she's live for a knockout, but I really think that her chances to victory have less to do with her, and it has more to do with Nunes just not showing up, which I don't think is going to be the case. Nunes was dealing with health issues in that first fight against Pena. She also looked to be in really good shape on the scale today. which you don't always get out of Amanda Nunes, but she did appear to be in really good condition for this fight. So I'm going to be really heavy on Amanda Nunes. Big advantages for her over Aldana for sure. I love the co-main event as well. Beneil Dariush against Charles Oliveira. And I kind of think Oliveira is getting slept on in this matchup. We continue to see the line grow more and more towards Beneil Dariush, where we now have it. Let's see. At the time I'm recording, Dariush is now up to about a minus 150 consensus across all sports books. And to me, I think this fight should be close to a pick'em. And since this fight is lined right in that mid-range on DraftKings, I do ultimately think that we're going to see Dariush picking up more ownership than Charles Oliveira. Let me check our most recent ownership projections and refresh it to see where we're at right now in terms of the ownership projections that we have over at stokastic.com, where we have Dariush. Yeah, right now we have Dariush projected for north of 30% ownership, and then Oliveira coming in mid 20% range. So that's 7,600 price tag on Oliveira. Once again, like I said, mid-range fight. We've got Oliveira, $7,600, Dariush at $8,600. I do expect Dariush to be a little bit more popular just based on how some of the betting action has gone, and it seems like people are heavier on the Dariush side. And the numbers, if you just look at them at face value, they do favor Dariush. He's a more active striker. He doesn't absorb quite as much damage. He's better takedown defense. But keep in mind that Oliveira has just been fighting the most difficult fights possible at the lightweight division as of late. His recent fights, Islam Makhachev, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson. And this was a somewhat washed version of Tony Ferguson, but not exactly what we've seen out of the last couple of fights out of Ferguson. So I do think that the strength of schedule for Oliveira kind of makes these numbers depressed and don't show how talented he is. And I think he has a really big athleticism advantage over Dariush. I think that Oliveira is more well-rounded on the feet. If this fight does go to the ground, I think Oliveira has the grappling advantages. It just kind of comes down to like how much damage has Oliveira taken, because he does get hurt in a lot of his fights, nearly all of them actually, and then he has to weather the storm, fights back, rallies, and has won a lot of his fights. That's how he's won over the last couple of years during his title reign. But that aside, I just think that the athleticism advantage that Charles Oliveira has, he has a 2-inch reach advantage over Dariush. He uses that teep kick up the middle really well. I think he should be able to keep distance against Dariush. And if this fight is to go to the ground, like I said, I do give Oliveira the grappling advantage. But I think this is going to be fought at an extremely high pace. Charles Oliveira fights rarely ever go to decision. If you look at Charles Oliveira. All right, so fights for Oliveira. Second round finish, first round finish, third round finish, second round finish. The fight against Tony Ferguson did go to a decision, but Oliveira damn near broke his arm in half. Tony Ferguson's just tough as hell. Submission, third round, first round finish, second round finish, second round finish, first round finish, second round finish. So other than that Ferguson fight, the last time we saw an Oliveira fight go to decision was against Jeremy Stevens in 2014. There's a very high likelihood this fight finishes inside the distance, and both sides warrant consideration. I'm going to be a little bit higher on Oliveira just because I do think that we could see Dariush being higher owned as our ownership projections are bearing out for this fight. Now, going through some of the other matchups on this card, and one other fight I want to talk about from a betting perspective, and also one that I think has a little bit of sneaky upside for DFS purposes. I think Orochi Lang has massive advantages over Ayman Zahabi, and I think Zahabi is a talented fighter, but he just doesn't really utilize his skill set very often when he's in the octagon because he doesn't throw anything. He lands 3.01 significant strikes per minute. Orochi Lang lands 6.07. Just based on volume, I have to favor the Orochi Lang side. He also lands 1.57 takedowns per 15 minutes. Even if I think Zahabi is the better fighter in terms of skill set, it doesn't matter if Orochi Lang is going to be doing that much more than him. So that kind of makes me think, all right, the path to victory for Zahabi is that he's probably going to have to knock out Orochi Lang. But Orochi Lang's never been knocked out in his entire career, and we've now seen him in 33 career fights in total. So it's really hard for me to reliably think Zahabi wins this fight inside the distance or that he wins based on volume when he's such a low output fighter and Orochi Lang fights at such a high output. The other thing this output does, it gives Orochi Lang the potential to score pretty well from a DraftKings perspective, landing the 6 significant strikes per minute, landing the takedowns, which I don't really think he's going to go to in this fight, but it's something we have seen him do in the past, certainly more frequently than Zahabi has done. 0.25 takedowns landed per 15 minutes, which is a 16% takedown accuracy. So I like Orochi Lang to win a pretty high volume-based decision and maybe even overwhelms Zahabi and is able to finish him, because we have seen Zahabi hurt in the UFC and finished, most notably by the spinning back elbow by Ricardo Ramos that knocked him out cold. So I like Orochi Lang. I think he's a sneaky low-owned tournament play. And the fact that we only have 11 fights, the ownership is going to be really concentrated. So the fact that we have this one fighter in Orochi Lang who's only projected for right around 20% ownership in the mid-range right now, I think he's somebody good to get overweight to the field to in tournaments. And from a betting perspective, I do like betting at minus 115 to win the fight outright. I think that's a really good bet. I don't quite understand the odds just based on the volume difference. And I mean, the fact that we've seen Zahabi do almost nothing over the course of his UFC career. Now, if we go look at some other fights that I think we want to be targeting, Mike Malott against Adam Fugit. There are so many unknowns about Mike Malott. Most notably, we don't really know what he looks like if he gets stretched out in a fight. Because if you look at what we've seen out of Mike Malott so far in the UFC Contender Series, he wins by submission in 39 seconds. Fights against Mickey Gall, knocks him out in 3 minutes. Fights his last fight against Johan Lioness, ends up finishing him in 4 minutes. So we don't know what Mike Malott is going to look like when he gets out of the first round. We do know that Adam Fugit could fight hard deep into fights. So I understand why Malott is a big favorite in this fight. We've seen him fight 3 times within the UFC. Well, 2 times in the UFC, once on the Contender Series. And he won by first round finish and looked pretty impressive in all of those fights. But I think this is his toughest competition in Adam Fugit. And if Fugit could make it out of the first round, I actually would favor him to win. So I think this is a really good fight to target. I think it should be fought at a fairly high pace if we look at the stats of these two. And if Mike Malott wins, I think there's a pretty good chance. Like I said, it's a first round knockout. If Fugit wins, I probably think it's a second or third round finish, because we've seen Mike Malott hurt pretty frequently in a lot of his fights. Even though we haven't seen him, say, like knocked out in the UFC, there was times like he got stung and backed up by Mickey Gall. So I think Fugit is live for a knockout here as well. He lands 5.4 significant strikes per minute and 4.76 takedowns per 15 minutes. So I would not be shocked at all to see Adam Fugit play the role of spoiler here and upset the hometown kid in Mike Malott. So Adam Fugit is somebody who I like as an underdog. Both sides of this fight warrant consideration, but I'm going to be a little bit higher on the Fugit side for DFS purposes, especially where we just don't have an abundance of underdogs to target. Like I'm going to be, I mentioned on Charles Oliveira a little bit, going to be on Adam Fugit, but it's hard to be super confident in any of these cheap plays in any kind of considerable way. Another fight that I think is a really high variance fight that's worth targeting, Blake Bilder and Kyle Nelson. I'm going to be a little bit higher on the Blake Bilder side of the fight. And a lot of this also is just going to be based on the volume difference. Kyle Nelson, who also gasses out fairly quickly in a lot of his fights. So Kyle Nelson has big power. He's capable of hurting guys on the feet, but he only lands 2.85 significant strikes per minute. And the output for Blake Bilder is very high, 6.58 strikes landed per minute. And then also we've seen him at times be a little bit defensively irresponsible, ended up getting clipped early in a couple of his fights, including the one most recently against Shannon Young. In the early going of that, Blake Bilder did get hurt a little bit on the feet in the first round. So that is one thing that could be a little bit scary here. Kyle Nelson's one of the underdogs I'm willing to play, but I'm going to be higher on the Blake Bilder side. And as far as pay-up options go, I do think he has some of the highest upside on the slate as a whole. One other fight that I wanted to talk about is the Dan Ige, Nate Landwehr fight, where I think Dan Ige wins this fight wherever it goes. He's one of my favorite pay-up options on the entire slate. And Nate Landwehr, for a guy who's just an absolute insane person, he fights the exact same way his personality is. Like if you've ever seen any of his post-fight interviews where he's just going crazy, yelling nonsense on the mic, kind of how he fights as well. He marches forward, throws a lot of crazy volume, but he gets hurt a lot. And we have seen him knocked out in fights where people don't usually get knocked out by Julian Erosa in the first round. People don't usually get knocked out by Herbert Burns in the first round. If you guys remember this fight, Landwehr, Herbert Burns, and this was a while ago now, it was 3 years ago, but the narrative going into the fight was, if Herbert Burns gets takedowns, he's going to submit Nate Landwehr. If the fight plays out on the feet, Nate Landwehr is going to knock out Herbert Burns. And how does this fight play out? Herbert Burns immediately at the start of the fight lands a knee just a couple minutes in, hurts Nate Landwehr, puts him away. And then we saw something similar, get hit by a knee against Julian Erosa and put away. So I have really big concerns about the durability. Why could I not say that word? That's not a hard word, durability. And I said it like I was an idiot. Durability. There we go. I have concerns about the durability of Nate Landwehr, who we've seen hurt, like I said, numerous times. And this is a big step up in competition for Nate Landwehr and a big step down in competition for Dan Ige. look at the fights that Dan Ige has had, where I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, look at the recent results. You know, he looked good finishing Damon Jackson, but his losses before that were against Mostfar Evloev, who I think is a potential future title contender, Josh Emmett, who just fought for the interim title, Chan Song Jung also just fought for the title. He knocks out Gavin Tucker on the first fight he throws that entire fight, and then Calvin Kattar, who's also been in the title mix for a while. So there's nothing wrong with any of these losses that Dan Ige has had. He just fought really difficult competition, whereas Nate Landwehr, he beat Austin Lingo, good upset over David Onama and had to weather a storm in that one. Beats Ludovic Klein. But like I said, he got knocked out by Herbert Burns and Julian Erosa. And Dan Ige would smoke those guys. And those guys smoked Nate Landwehr. So I favored Dan Ige pretty heavily in this matchup. And because of the way Nate Landwehr fights, I think Ige is really live, not just for a knockout, but a knockout in the first or second round. So I'm going to be high on Dan Ige in this fight. One of my favorite pay-up options on the slate and somebody I really like for Rainmakers purposes as well. As for the other fights on the card, I'll just run through them really quick. Belbita and Oliveira, one of my least favorite fights on the card from a DFS perspective. I don't have a real strong lean on who's going to win. It's an 11-fight card. If you had an exposure to either of them here or there, I wouldn't say it's the end of the world, but I'm not going to prioritize either of them. David Dvorak against Steve Erceg and Miranda Maverick against Jasmine Jasdavicius. I view both these fights being pretty similar in terms of I favor Maverick to win. I favor Dvorak to win. They're both big favorites. But I don't think either of them have massive upside from a fantasy perspective. So fighters that I'm picking to win, but like I'm not betting them at their current number. I'm not going to be prioritizing them in DFS. Chris Curtis against Nasruddin Imavov, another fight where it's a very close fight, and I don't think the winner is going to score particularly well from a DFS perspective. I don't expect there to be any real wrestling or grappling involved in this fight. If there is a knockout, it's probably a little bit more likely to be on the Chris Curtis side, who has a little bit more power in his hands. But most likely scenarios, I think this fight goes to the judge's decision. It's striking based and scores fairly well. The Marc-Andre Barrio against Eric Anders, another fight that's priced in the mid-range, 8,400 for Barrio. And then we have the other side. What is the price point on? Yeah, Anders at 7,800. Another fight where I think there could be a lot of clinch work involved in this. So another fight that I'm not going to be really all that high on. I'll pick Barrio to win because he usually has a little bit more output on his side, and Eric Anders is really unreliable. But still not a fight that I want to be massively invested in. The ones that I'm highest prioritizing are the ones that I highlighted before. Let's go and build a Rainmakers lineup. I've got a bunch of cards for this fight. This is going to be an elite lineup, by the way. So I've got Nunes elite cards. I've got Maverick. I've got Dariush. I've got Ige in here. Oliveira, Aldana. I do have one legendary Anders that I got in a pack, so I'm just going to be playing that because I got a legendary Eric Anders, so no reason to not play it. Let's see, though. I think Aldana does make for the best captain overall. Looking at some of the other fighters, I want to put a Blake Builder in my elite lineup. I'll go with Oliveira in this one. Play one of my Oliveiras. I do think that we are probably going to see Dariush a little bit more popular in the higher end contest, just because, like I said, some of the way the betting line went, there are a lot of cards available of both Oliveira and Dariush. So let's see, 2 spots left. I could go with, I'll take a safe win in this lineup. Oh, I have serial number 1 of Miranda Maverick. All right, so I've got a big favorite in Builder. I've got a favorite in Maverick, who I don't think has the highest fantasy potential in the world, but is pretty safe for a win. Amanda Nunes is my captain. She has a lot of upside. Same with Oliveira. I guess I'll go with Mike Malott. One more big favorite. Whoever wins between him and Fugit, I think scores extremely well. So I want to have one or the other in most of my lineups. I think it's a really high priority fight to target. I'll kind of alternate back in, probably in fights in some of my lineups where I have a couple of underdogs. I'm probably more apt to take Mike Malott, and then in some other lineups for Rainmakers purposes where maybe I already have a lot of favorites, I might go with Mike Fugit with Adam Fugit to differentiate a little bit. So let's submit this. All right, and that is going to do it for us today. If you guys have any questions or comments for myself, like the video. Also, do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Throw some questions you have in the comment section. I usually check those out before the slate starts. And if you want any more bets or other information from me, go check out Chalkboard. It is a totally free to download app. I post some bets in there. hang out in there, answer questions. It's just been a fun way to sweat some bets with everybody. So go check that out. But once again, guys, already told you to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. One more reminder to do that. Also, enjoy the card. Have a great weekend. See you guys back here next week.